Check, check, 1, 2. They got a new housing plan for the ghetto eventually. Projects for a new American century. False flag terrorism controlling you mentally. The gospel in the hands of people with no empathy. A mixture of dangerous social chemistry between law enforcement and a military entity. Cameras on the corner of every corner you facing. Testing out a future Gestapo and immigration. Power consolidation, information restricted. Just like the iron law of oligarchy predicted. Incarcerating the poor among the drug addicted. But not the families of the ruling class that's afflicted. Cause it's a fucking caste system like corrupted Hinduism. I think you should listen. I've been through the system in prison. I've been through religion. I carried the cross as a Christian like it was anti-disestablishmentarianism until the seeds of despotism arrested my vision. Lyricism with cynicism and syllogisms until they bedro out these campos and kill me in prison. Chemtrail conditions, stem cells of Leo Strauss's philosophy, the birth of neocon policy. But I laugh at America's fear of a new world order controlling the hemisphere, because our people been living that shit for the past 500 years. We in a church, so you'll have to excuse some of the language. I prepared a series of a cappella pieces because the acoustics can be funny in a place like this. But the other one I wanted to do is a song that's very important. I'm from where the golden diamonds are ripped from the earth, right next to slave capsules where the water is cursed, from where police brutality's not half as nice. It makes the hood in America look like paradise compared to the AIDS-infested Caribbean slum, African streets with a passport's an American gun for when they massacre people and try to keep it quiet and spend the next 25 years trying to deny it. I'm from where they cut your hand off if you make a fist. Let's go coca, because the job market doesn't exist except slave labor, modern day company store. And peacekeepers don't ever come here no more. I'm from where the bombs that they used to drop on Vietnam still has children born deformed 8 months before they gone. I'm from where they lost the true meaning of the Quran, because heroin is not compatible with Islam. And niggas know that, but grow that poppy seed anyway, because that food drop parachute does not come every day. I'm from where people pray to the gods of their conquerors, and practically every president's a money launderer.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. Cornel West recently reiterated his strong belief that musicians and artists could be the vanguard of the species. Music is the language of the soul, the sound of the collective heart beating together with a transformative power to bring about systemic change and foster community dialogue. Music, culture, socioeconomic challenges can intersect to forge the best in radical human consciousness. We need to foster healthy, healing communities rooted in justice and radical love. In a world that isn't known to consistently produce artists who have taken up the radical left cause, our guest today on the Radical Imagination, Immortal Technique, Felipe Coronel, stands out as a rapper, composer, and activist of unparalleled power, commitment, and creativity. Born in a military prison in Lima, Peru, his family immigrated to Harlem when he was 2 to escape the Peruvian Civil War. As a teenager, he was arrested multiple times and charged with assault-related offenses, which led him to become incarcerated for over a year. Honing his rapping skills in jail, he later won numerous freestyle rap competitions in the New York underground hip-hop scene. Most of his lyrics have focused on global politics and a broad range of issues such as racism, world revolution, war, socialism, government control, rape, famine, colonialism, self-determination, and Wall Street greed. He imagines the unimaginable.
How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing okay. The voice is doing okay. We had a little fall there, but everything's okay. It's such a pleasure. I love having you here.
Thank you very much.
Let's dive in. We know that we're both at the recent Cornell event in New York City here on the church in 86th Street. We're going to be playing clips of you and some of the raps that you presented there, which blew everybody away. But let's begin here. Imagining the unimaginable. What is it that you are trying to do with your music, with your activism, your sense of radicalism, however you want to define it? And please do define it for us.
Well,
if you can.
First and foremost, thank you for having me on the show. I think that one of the things that we have to imagine, first and foremost, to take ourselves out the box, is what is something that constitutes being radical, and accepted inhumanity. To question that as radical, for a person to accept that there are 30,000 casualties in Gaza is normal, and to question that as radical. And that, I think, is the first step in understanding revolutionary politics. What people call radicalism is just the normality of human decency, right?
Or should be. That's what radicalism should be.
I think
that we don't do this to people.
The other problem, I think, is that people really only have two choices in this duopoly. So they're confronted with the idea of choosing a side which may represent their politics, but betrays their ideals in many ways, which is what we've seen happening with COVID, with the Gaza, Israel genocide, which we see in terms of Republican, Democrat response to immigration. So take conservative Christians, people who are supposed to forgive, supposed to love, their xenophobia towards immigrants, which they'll excuse by saying, no, we mean illegal people, not legal people. Well, if we took a consensus, Ellis Island wasn't founded in 1776. It was founded in 1899, which means that if your European people came here before 1899, you didn't have any papers. No one had the authority to give you any papers. Stealing land from Native Americans and then drawing a map is the equivalent to legitimacy. So,
and being given land through the Homestead Act also.
Right. So I think that kind of is where people should first examine or re-examine, I would say, what they think is radical.
But doesn't the left do that also? It is constantly debating itself, right? In terms of who is the most radical, who is the purest, which is the radical truth we need to follow.
Here's my problem with that, Jim. It depends on what left we're discussing.
Okay.
If we discuss the actual left, which is left of the center-right Democratic Party, sure. Right. If we're talking about the Democratic Party, the only litmus test is the allegiance to what we see as now the collective sort of status quo, whereas Republicans are trying to pass themselves off these days as if they're counterculture. And I think what's interesting about this is you notice that Democrats did the same thing during the Bush administration when they pretended to be anti-war. Right?
But they never called themselves radical.
Oh my God, this is the most terrible thing in the world.
But to be fair, Democrats never call themselves radical. There's talk about the radical right.
They're not. It's not a question of calling yourself radical. The Nazis called themselves the National Socialist Party, and yet during their fascist empire, 3 corporations owned, 90% of the collective wealth inside Nazi Germany. So that dashes the right-wing sort of hill that they've chose to die on, that the Nazis were left-wing. You know what I mean? That somehow this is a left-wing conspiracy, that everything—
and supported by business interests in this country too.
Everything having to do with the left is somehow evil. Now, here's the problem with that. If you go back and look at the reason that people break into America, why are people coming here? Because when you get a job here, an official job, you're protected in a way that you aren't in other places. All those things that make America, no pun intended, make America great. The fact that your wife can't be fired for being pregnant. The fact that your child doesn't have to work in a steel mill. The fact that if you get hurt on the job, that you should be compensated. The fact that you can't not be fired for no apparent reason whatsoever. These things were not given to people by Democrats, Republicans, and definitely weren't given to people by capitalists. They were given to people by radical left-wing communists in the early 1920s.
Who struggled,
right.
Yes.
So I think that's the hypocrisy of those people who despise anything that is in any way, shape, or form associated with the left. And that's why I think we need to draw a very clear line between
claiming it as their own,
the Democrat version of what the left is and what the actual left is.
So it becomes more this debate about distribution of wealth, socialism. Who gets what?
I think that's
part of it.
That definition changes based on what country you're in. So here in America now, because of the political climate, people think that anything left of hunting the homeless for sport is communism, right? But if you grow up in Latin America, or especially in South America, the big difference that you see is that the people who believe that those who work the land, right, those people who work in the mine, should they get the majority percentage of what they make every day? And if you believe that, they call you a communist. And if you believe that European companies or Asian companies from somewhere else that set up all of this stuff and then just use the workers and exploit the natural resources through some clever deal that they made
setting
with
up
the
governments that
ruling government.
support that.
If you think that those people should get the lion's share of what they get, then you're considered a capitalist. And I think that that's the conflicting ideology. When we talk about economics, that's a rouse, right? Because money doesn't really exist. It's a human feature, right? It's like the Bible, the Quran, or the Torah. It needs human interpretation, right? It's not singular.
Meaning attached to it.
So what does the money actually represent? It represents the necessity for controlling entities. In this case, you have the three big empires, China, Russia, and the United States, with the EU as its junior partner, vying for resources. So what we see in all of these conflicts that go on around the world are that they're still resource based, right? Let's take Gaza. People say, oh, but that's Hamas, that's Mossad, that's them fighting. They've been doing that for 75 years since they've been occupied. That's true. But less than 20 years ago, they discovered what they call the Levantine Basin of natural gas. Do you know what this is, Jim?
And we talked about it before.
This is billions, trillions with a T, not B, billions, trillions of cubic feet of,
now, where is this located?
Natural gas. This is off the coast of Gaza. And it extends to off the coast of what would be like southwestern, what people call southwestern Israel now. So that's
how many miles is that?
It's huge. It's several pockets, right? Now let's take another example, just because I don't want to go into one much.
But
let's take Haiti. Okay. Everyone has all these terrible things to say about Haiti. Haiti's a quote unquote shithole country. You know what I mean? That they're in a position that, oh my God, nobody wants anything from them. Right. So then why did we engineer a coup in Haiti? Does it have anything to do with the fact that there's natural gas off the coast of Haiti now, that's what they've discovered, and they don't know how deep it is or what resources they are, but also the fact that Haiti's mountain ranges are rich with, and let me just be very clear, untapped natural resources. Right. And by that, I mean precious metals. Okay. So again, all of these conflicts, we can point to the politics, we can point to a political ideology, but the underlying theme, thing they all have in common is they have a natural resource base.
So that's where your politics, well, I want to use politics, but that's where your worldview begins, with that struggle that's been going on since human civilization, hasn't it?
I would say that that's a place for it to perhaps find a gestation period. Okay. Right? Because I think when people first wake up in terms of their what people call a political awakening, it's a feeling of being used. You feel like everyone else was in on the joke and you weren't. Right? Yeah. So I know lots of people that have felt that way recently. So New York City, I grew up here. I grew up around dozens and dozens of friends of mine who happened to be Jewish. Yeah. And they felt like they were lied to their whole life. They went on a birthright trip where they felt like everything was edited. And now they're being a person that begins to rediscover not just faith, but what people have manipulated that to be. In the same way, I know people that are staunch Democrats.
Yeah.
And the experience with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton destroyed their faith, not just in the party, but in the electoral system as well. So I think that one of the first things that people come to politics with is the feeling of being used and being lied to. I think
disillusionment.
Right.
But it's also the white middle professional managerial classes, who I think you were talking about before, who play that game, even though they know it is this game, but they're willing to compromise because of that all-powerful money, and which is tied in again to the resources, the greed in Wall Street, which you so eloquently portray in your music. Right?
My thing is this: in real life, we've all read little kids' stories. Right? In real life, if you traded your car for a bag of magic beans, your wife would beat the shit out of you worse than you did to yourself. Like I'm telling you now.
Yeah.
So that's the hustle. We're gonna give you this paper money for these resources that are of immeasurable wealth, like uranium, right? And I think that's where we've seen the expansion of all of these wars into more resource-based activities. So take a different struggle, like the Ukraine. So people say, well, how does resource-based politics get involved in this? Sure. How did Russia really offset NATO from supplying the Ukraine? By cutting them off in Africa. When the Russians had the Prigozhin guy from the Wagner group pass away, one interesting footnote is that only half of the rest of his men went to Belarus. So out of the 60,000 troops that he had left, that he originally had, he lost about half his men in the war, and that's the real reason he had a coup. So let me just finish. Prigozhin sent half his force, or whoever took over after he died, sent half his force to Belarus, but the other half took a big loop and ended up in Africa and managed to push the French out of Niger, out of Burkina Faso, and out of all these other West African nations, and have weakened America in Africa Con. Why have they weakened France and America? Because without those natural resources, they can't afford to continue their own society's needs, let alone the Ukraine. Yes.
So that's what you're saying, right? So there are these three fountainheads of empire that are competing with each other. They have their bailiwick of influence. They're all trying to be world players, and they're conflicting with each other at times, whether it's in Africa or Asia or the Middle East. And so many of these countries, former colonies, become pawns in all of this.
I won't even say conflicting with one another. Jim, they're in open war now.
Oh, China, Russia, United States.
They've
playing
decided
itself out in different
countries.
Countries. Okay.
However, they're not using their own troops. And what we've seen now with the war in Ukraine and the massacres in Gaza is that people are employing a lot more experimental drone technology. Even with Iran's attack on Israel's secret base, these are drones that have bypassed the Iron Dome system. So they're testing out new material.
Well, it certainly didn't work a couple days ago.
War machines.
But what's the, you've articulated the influence of America, we get that in the middle, but what about China and Russia here? Explain that to our audience.
Here's an interesting thing.
Because I don't think we hear that much about that.
Let's say a person is not a radical politician. Yeah. Let's say they don't, how about this? Let's say that they have the opposite view, that they're conservative, that they're staunch Zionist. Here's my message to them. The United States is using Israel. It has 17 bases inside Israel, right? Their perspective is this: them, China, and Russia could end the entire conflict tomorrow. because China and Russia can offer Israel what the United States cannot.
So America is supporting and arming Israel in part to show Russia and China its influence?
No, let me finish.
Yeah.
They could end it tomorrow because
Who
the
could?
all of these, the triumvirate of those nations.
Okay.
The reason that it hasn't ended, or that Israel can't be guaranteed security, the reason they're in an alliance with America is because they used to be in an alliance with the Soviet Union. The kibbutz system that we see, that where those people were raided, that's a Soviet socialist system. That's where that's the design from where it comes from. So a person
Social
who used
Zionism,
to be
yes.
in the USSR's camp jumped to the American camp. Why? Why did Israel jump from the leftist camp to a right-wing capitalist camp? Why? Because they offered them what they thought at the time was protection and security from other people in the region. And what Israel has realized now is that all the United States has used them for is for washing money, and also by being able to sell them a sword and a shield. But what it cannot do, what the United States has no more influence to be able to do, is to stop spears and arrows and swords from being thrown at that person. You don't really need a shield or a sword, right? We don't have an standing military conflict with Canada, right? Sure, there's some issues on the border, but we're not in open war with Mexico, right? So I think what people are now beginning to realize is that the United States spent all of its political capital, or I'm sure they realize this already, after 9/11, right? Before 9/11 or during 9/11, everyone was on America's side. This is horrible. Oh my God, how could this happen to people? But then during those years of occupation and murder in Iraq and Afghanistan, they spent that political capital. The United States can't call Lebanon, it can't call Iraq, it can't call Iran, it can't call Syria, it can't call any of the Central Asian countries.
Yeah.
Russia and China have the ability to influence those countries, and if they all actually had a summit, what could happen is they could all agree that that should end now, and they have the ability to make these people who they control the flow of supply for stop, which America doesn't have the ability to do.
And the rich Gulf countries as well, bringing Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, into sort of, as you say, this summit. So that intrigues me. You're starting to talk about...
Wait. They don't need to be brought in. They're already in.
All right, okay.
They traded their... Listen, 9/11 had other consequences. I just want to explain to your audience.
Sure.
Another thing about 9/11 that people always miss is that the Middle East used to get about half of its, or more than half of its, weapon supply from Russia. And in case you didn't notice, just like during the pandemic, when we had all this inflation that came out of nowhere, after 9/11, the Middle East as a whole changed suppliers. And now 80% of the weapons that are sold to the Middle East come from the United States. So
that goes to places like
again,
Egypt as
course.
well. I think even gets more.
Saudi Arabia gets F-16s.
Absolutely.
But I think what Saudi Arabia and Jordan have been confronted with now is the idea that they're on the front line against Iran and China and Russia and all of its
Iran
friends.
is being financed also by who?
Well, I think Iran is a special case because Iran is the crux. The reason that the United States wants to destroy Iran is because it's been a unifying force for Russia and China. For people that aren't aware of history, Russia and China used to hate each other. I don't mean like they went to war, they killed each other left and right, but there was a definite conflict to the point where during the war in Korea, the Russians barely did anything for North Koreans, and the Chinese didn't forget that. So during Vietnam, when the Russians were supporting Vietnam, the Chinese took that period of time to make an allyship with the United States.
Yeah. So let me bring us back to your music, your lyrics, and maybe even Cornell's hope that you're in the vanguard. Well, you literally, and right. Musicians of that can bring about some sort of rationality and feeling, empathy, and if we may, radical love to turn this around in some way. Do you see the possibilities of that? We were at the event. Combatants for Peace were there. They've been on this show. I introduced them to Cornell. He loved them. These are Shuli, Palestinian, who was in an Israeli jail for 10 years. His counterpart wasn't able to be at the event, but an Israeli soldier. They are now working together, trying to gain trust, as they say, combatants for peace, to turn it around. The Bedouin woman, Amal, who was so courageous, who was Israeli citizen, went to Ben Gurion. She too gets at it from all sides. She's part of the Israeli peace movement. So the Arabs didn't like her. The Bedouins didn't like her.
But I don't think it's a question of that.
But is it a question? How do we bring peace?
Well,
how can the musicians?
That's a loaded question. I think before we bring peace, we have to understand who started the war.
Okay.
I think when people say, "Oh, this is such a complicated thing," it's really not. Like, you know what? It's only complicated if you're offended by the truth, right? A foreign country called England wanted to offset growing Arab nationalism, and so they founded a country which they supported. In 1948, we forget this because we always talk about who attacked Israel. We say, "Oh man, 7 countries, Arab countries." Right. Who was supporting Israel at that time? The United States, France, and of course, our lovely friend, the UK. So
can we bring in one element here?
Sure.
This is 2 or 3 years removed from the Holocaust.
Which wasn't committed by Palestinian people.
Exactly. But
so why wasn't it
carved,
so why was not
Jewish population,
so why was the country not carved out of Germany?
What? To put Israel in Germany? What are you?
My whole
because
point
you are a scholar. You're a historian.
So here's an interesting thing.
There have been roots.
If there's an
Israelis,
if there's a
Jews
Native
have roots
American,
in Israel, right?
There's a Native
Ancient
American.
If
there's a Native American here, and he says, "I'm indigenous to this land."
Right.
Right. He's an American citizen.
Right.
He's an American.
Yeah.
There's a white guy next to him.
Right.
His family's been here for 200 years.
I understand.
He's still not indigenous to this land.
I get it.
So yes, there are people who were in Israel who were indigenous to the land, but the majority of European immigrants that came there, were not indigenous.
Around the world, that's been happening. So,
but I think we can't excuse it by saying, okay,
I'm not
this is happening.
excusing it.
This is happening
I'm not
everywhere.
excusing
I think the main issue is that the problem that people have had with the politics that we see now is going back to the very beginning of our conversation, which is people who have all these liberal traits, all of these progressive traits when it comes to everything. But then when it comes to Israel and Palestine, they find themselves on the side of conservative people. And I think that in this particular scenario, that is how leftist politics are destroyed. That's how the left is destroyed. It's picked apart little by little by people who have these sort of overarching agendas that go over and above the rights of workers, the rights of immigrants, the rights of women.
What I would like to see is what you're talking about too, that this has become the be-all and end-all defining what it means to be quote-unquote leftist. It seems to me, at least when we were back in the 60s and Hayden and all these other people, the New Left and SDS, we were talking about much broader issues and interconnections here. So it becomes so focused on one particular issue. And I think we need to have a broader understanding and use what he's talking about here, radical love.
There's an old joke that someone told me a long time ago. And
a Jewish humorist?
No. They said, do you know what the definition of a liberal is? And I said, what? I was like, please make it original. I said, because I've heard them all.
Yeah.
And the person says to me, this is years ago, they said, it's a person who supports every struggle for freedom, except the one that's going on right now. And unfortunately, what we see in terms of liberalism is
limousine liberals, right?
Oh my God! It's not even limousine. It's even people who consider themselves progressives. They think that human rights are radical. They think that to imagine human rights for people, you need a radical imagination. No, you don't. To imagine human rights for people,
you do need to be on the show.
You just need to be normal. No, but
I get it.
I will say this, Jim. You know what?
What?
I
Tell
think
me.
that all human beings are naturally compassionate people. And I think that something fucked up has to happen, excuse my language, to a person to make them discompassionate, to make them say, oh, there are no innocent children in this region. That something terrible has to happen to them.
I agree
or
with you.
They
Traumas,
have to be brainwashed.
hurts.
Yes.
And I agree with you on that. That's what needs to be seen on both sides. There's got to be a little acknowledgement. What happened October 7th is wrong. Whatever political stripe you're come from. What's wrong now is a continuation of this horror show. That's wrong. Now, once we get to that point, but there are elements of the left that won't even begin to say that. Well, this is all a matter of colonialism. We can understand this is a normal reaction.
But I mean,
no, it ain't.
But if a person is coughing because they're sick,
yeah,
you immediately identify the coughing with the sickness. In this particular case, I think the problem is that too many people that are willfully being ignorant or they're feigning ignorance by pretending that these issues started on October 7th. I agree. Or that only one group of people have hostages.
I agree.
Because the Hamas people, they took hostages.
I agree.
But if we bring up hostages,
there's thousands.
Then there are thousands of Israeli people that are there with no due process. If we talk about sexual assault, right? Yes, horrifically in times of war, that is something that seems to go hand in hand with violent conflict, right? So if we begin the conversation on how many people were sexually assaulted by Hamas, then it automatically opens a conversation to say, well, wait a minute. What about the women that have been sexually assaulted by these settlers? There's not even, it's not a question of condemnation. You brought up condemnation, which I think is great, but even better than condemnation are consequences for a person's actions. There's no consequences for anything that they do to any of those people. Just like if you look at our military, tell me, Jim, how many people went to jail for war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan? In Afghanistan, 225,000 people. In Iraq, 1.1 million.
Right, were killed. And then we forgot, it's not part of the discussion anymore. It's gone, finished, that's it. You're absolutely right.
But if we're talking about leftist politics, then let's go all the way left. Joseph Stalin once said, I'm not a fan of Stalin, but I think he did interesting things in his life.
Interesting thing. Yeah, we also killed my grandmother's father, but go ahead. He was in the gulag.
He's a sick fuck. But here's
the
here's the truth about this situation. He said that if you kill one single person, it's a murder. But if you kill a million people, it's a statistic.
Yeah.
And that's what's been proven here.
And you can get elected to be despot or president. Yeah.
I think the other problem that we see,
or if you kill 10 people, you get put in a mental hospital.
Is that you have to inject, right?
Yeah.
Your personal politics into entertainment, into everything in order for it to fuse into society. See, that's the big difference between Russia and China and the United States. I explain this to the Russians and the Chinese and all the people that I've met from media, from government. I've always laughed because it's a common theme. I say, it's not that we have more people that follow our media or we win the media war every time because we have more news shows that tell our perspective of things. No, it's because everything about American entertainment is centered in the idea of fighting for this country or about capitalism, right? There's an old school, that's what I want, money, right? Yeah. You sing about money in the 1950s for people who don't even have freedom. The United States still isn't a democracy until 1967, and people.
Well, the business of America is business. Yes, we know that.
Singing the praises of capitalism, or singing the praises of imperialism. Or before, you couldn't see a black or brown person on television, and now they're all on TV. So much so that right-wing white people are complaining that they're taking up roles that aren't theirs. But here's the truth. Most of the black and brown people that you see on television, they're playing a cop or a CIA agent.
Or a drug dealer.
Or no. Now they're playing the part of the establishment. So here's the interesting part. So yeah, we can be accepted by America as long as we're a Buffalo Soldier for this country. And that therein
that becomes normalized. So again, that's what your music is so much about. And in others, raising the consciousness, call it what you will, an alternative narrative that we're not exposed to. Now, I have to say this because there's so much to talk about with you. You picked me up the other day, and in the car was playing, remember? Handel's Messiah.
Oh.
Now, one of the many things I love about you, you met my best friend at the time, Eugene Fodor's wife, out in California. I gave you a couple CDs years ago. You listen to that, the virtuoso violinist. You listen to all kinds of music, don't you? What did Handel's Messiah strike in you? What did you?
Listen, I'm a fan of all music, all good music, whether it's
what makes it good for you?
Reggae, merengue,
right,
soca, classical, anything, folk music, yodeling. If it carries a good tune,
a good yodel.
If it
you heard it here first, and on his neck. So you're gonna
no, I don't know if I'm looking for yodelers.
That'll be the next event with Cornell, right?
Anything that's set up that can be manipulated to be pleasing to the ear, that's put in a certain way, right? What
does that mean?
The bass goes with the harmony,
okay.
Right? Anything that if you looked at it through the cage of those meticulous ink strokes, you would be staring at an absolute beauty on paper. And then to be able to take that and put it to something else that is actually touches people. Right?
Yeah.
I did a song called Dance with the Devil.
Yeah.
It's a song about rape and murder and the consequences behind that. And people have always asked me for years, Technique, is that a true story? Did it really happen? And I say, what are you talking about? I wasn't, when this happened, I was like a 12-year-old kid. It was something that happened in my neighborhood. But here's the interesting thing. People constantly ask me, what happened to those guys that committed the gang rape and the murder? And I said, well, the neighborhood thought they were cursed. And they said, what? I said, yeah, because they just started dying. I said, but I don't think that it was a curse. I think these people were living terrible lives. They were morally bankrupt, and they murdered a young lady, and with that type of hubris, walked around life acting like that. And I'm gonna tell you an even sicker story. One of these people allegedly, who was allegedly involved in this, killed someone's younger brother. And in order to find this person, right, they couldn't find him. They went to his house, they went to his mother's house. They shot up his grandmother's house. They couldn't find this kid. Allegedly.
So
wait.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Allegedly, these people murdered his 8-year-old son. Why? Because they figured they could get him to come to the funeral that way.
Wow.
So they would know where he was.
Wow.
And I tell people all the time, one, if you're out there in the world and you think you're tough, please just remember that everyone has somebody that loves them. And two, that if you live foul, then you're not going to be able to escape the consequences of the prison that you built for yourself. And I think that kind of sticks the knife in and twists it for people. Like the machinations of your life are what you did, right? And by the same spirit, by the same token, you can repair them as well. You have the power to change your circumstance from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high.
And I know you do go into prisons and talk, and as Cornell did, also teaches 41 years. So this is what you try to instill in people, that everyone can be redeemed in a sense.
Most people.
Okay.
I think listen, I very rarely run into wicked people, but I do think and I do believe that there are people in the world that enjoy chaos and enjoy pain. Like you can call them, sociopathic, sadistic individuals, whatever it may be. But there's someone out there right now, Jim, who's smarter than you and me and likes to see people suffer, or doesn't think that that's a deal breaker for making money or being in business.
No question. We need mechanisms to restrain, but not necessarily to punish, because they've been punished already. They punish themselves. But I get your point, how individuals who grow up in certain types of environments can be brought to do these sorts of things, the deprivation, and collectively we could see it. as you were talking, I was thinking, again, the atrocities are going on in Gaza. And that did occur there and still occurring. It's not part of that prophetic tradition.
Right.
And Jews have gotten away from that. We need to bring that back, as you and Cornell and I've tried to do in this show here. But go ahead.
I think one other thing about that specifically is I saw a Catholic bishop from Palestine, and he was giving a sermon. And in the sermon, he said, listen, even if every bomb that they fired at our people was not meant to hit a civilian.
Right.
Even if every bomb, even if I believe that, which I don't, he said, there is no nation in the world, there's no place in the world where you can leave 350,000 people without a home, without water, without food,
well,
without
did.
access to anything.
We did.
No, but that's
Vietnam.
but that's my point.
Yeah, that's the
And
point.
and what we recognize now
And what Russia's doing with Ukraine
as a radical imagination. Well, I think the difference is this.
Tell me.
If Russia, I really struggle with that comparison, and I say it because of this. The eastern half of Ukraine looks like Gaza. It is flattened. It is there's nothing there. It has been carpet bombed. It looks like Mariupol. That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
But Western Ukraine don't look like that. Why? Is it maybe because America and Europe provided surface-to-air missiles and weapon systems, and we all know, anyone who's been in the military, they don't let privates fly the plane, dummy. You got to be a captain or a major. And you know what happens when those people crash the plane? They have intel, and they're hooked up to a car battery, because we live in the real world, and they get shocked, or they get cut, or they get sleep deprived until they give up information. And Russia can't afford that. And guess who can't afford that? We can't afford that. Or Israel can't afford that. Or any other country. That's why they'll fly over Gaza, but not one Israeli jet has flown over Yemen yet. Why? Because the Russians have continuously supplied them with plenty of surface-to-air missiles for their war with the Saudis. The Saudi-backed eastern half of Yemen.
You know, again, as the historian that you are, historical memory plays such a part in all of us. And again, just one example of the October 7th, some of the old timers in Israel think it's, again, they're back in Poland in a pogrom. Now, they weren't, but this is traumas and hurts, and the Palestinians have, and God knows what more traumas are going to develop as a result of what's going on there. We've got to begin to end this sort of pattern. That's what I'm trying to do so much in this show and with you. I think
though we have to inject into it the fact that those people, especially those people who were trapped in a ghetto by the Nazis, all of those Jewish people,
right?
They were brave to fight back, Jim. They were brave to fight back. They weren't using human shields. They weren't using cowardly attacks. They were brave to fight in a guerrilla war against the Germans who were torturing and killing their people. We never picked to live in a ghetto when we all moved here from wherever we picked him. I didn't even know where that fucking word came from until I read that history.
The Warsaw Ghetto.
Right. Yeah. And then I read Night by Elie Wiesel, and one of the things that really hit me in the book was it's not just what they do to you. One of the main themes of the first couple of chapters is the idea that they made you do this to other people. In other words, they would make people fight over a bread, to see one person kill another person for bread. Right.
The sadism that's involved in that.
What are they doing? They're watching children from their drone kill each other for a slice of bread if the parachute thing don't fall on you.
You just eloquently talked about a specific example of torture and sadism that existed, that you saw exist, to get this 8-year-old kid there to killed
I
us.
didn't see. I heard about.
No, you
this.
heard about. Okay, but that's what people can turn into. I agree with you. We're not born that way.
But that brings up another point, Jim. There's some people that think if a person commits violence towards a child or a woman, that person is automatically a coward. And I want to give your audience some unfortunate news. There are people in the world who think that it's dishonorable to hurt a woman or a child, right? And then there are people that they'll hurt a woman or a child because they're cowardly and they are afraid to confront a man. And then there's the third type of person, and these people rule the world, and they don't care who they have to hurt. If they have to kill your 8-year-old son to get to you, they'll make you feel like it's your fault that your son died. Now, the truth is this, though, and this is where the self-reflection comes in. The guy whose 8-year-old son they murdered, he killed somebody's little brother too.
Yeah.
And that guy probably remembered when his little brother was 8 years old. However, that's not an excuse for what he did.
Absolutely.
I would never say that.
Absolutely.
However, I will tell you that the people who are willing to hurt anyone to get what they want, they're not cowardly. Those people are the people who run the world, and they're frighteningly brave. And what I mean by that is that they have the self-confidence that should be taught in schools. The ability to blame other people for their deaths, just like we hear in the media. Oh my God, they're using human shields. What do you mean they're in a populated area? If I had a rocket launcher, Jim, and I ran into Mount Sinai Hospital, I said I'm gonna kill someone, and the NYPD's response was to drop a bunker buster on Mount Sinai Hospital, there's no coming back from that.
I understand. But
where do we
Hamas
find common ground?
We got to find common ground because they did set up. We know that set up their levels of power underneath these hospitals.
But
some of it.
But
anyway.
again,
and that's wrong too.
But again, we're discussing Hamas as if it is.
It's not in a vacuum. You're right. It goes back and forth.
Not just that, but the United States is willing to live with that carnage. Why? Because it believes that Hamas, or what it's doing now, is propagating the idea that Hamas is an entity of Iran, that it's a satellite of Iran. Why? Because the first propaganda waves didn't hit. The first propaganda wave was there were mass killing of children. That was revealed to be a lie. The second propaganda wave, if you remember, was that Hamas was somehow linked to ISIS. They were calling them ISIS.
That some might have been
and
ISIS,
here's
right.
the problem. Hamas and ISIS hate each other. They're ideologically opposed to one another, right?
Well,
and also, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist by saying this, the United States has a horrific record when it comes to dealing with ISIS, because it's actually employed Al-Qaeda and splinter cells of ISIS to try and fight against Bashar al-Assad.
Exactly. So is it a structure? Is it the structure we're living under? The sociologist in me, it goes beyond the individual, yes, but the individual becomes part of that structure. And it's not that we're totally incapable of changing that. You have someone, let's remaining couple minutes we have. Here's Cornel West on this quixotic venture to speak what I think is a fairly radical message.
But I don't think it's radical. That's the difference.
All right, we get that. I understand. It should be.
So that's my pitch.
All right, and I agree with
Everybody
your pitch.
else is crazy.
I agree, except for Cornel.
He's not. Like Joe Biden is a genocidal maniac.
All right, I got
Trump is a con man, and we got a regular guy with regular life problems that's lived his life and has a world of wisdom, right?
So how do things change? The systemic changes. Can someone like a prophetic voice? What if King was running? He hadn't been assassinated. What if we had him could this be turned around? Is it structural? Is it systemic? That's what's creating the greed that you so eloquently again talk about it.
Just to kind of bring this whole
Yeah,
thing
please
and
do.
wrap it up.
Yeah,
I think the problem is that we think it's one thing.
right.
I think that people on the, whether they call themselves the left or they part of some revolutionary community,
Right.
They go back to this one theme ideology. So the one thing that's going to save us is Christianity. Oh, radical
right.
Christianity and the prosperity gospel is the devil. And
Right.
okay, no, that didn't work.
Right.
And it's communism is going to save us. No, socialism. No, it's
No, ism is
religion,
gonna do
Islam, or
I agree.
one thing. And if anyone out there that's watching this show has ever taken some kind of martial arts, you know what you could do with one person's finger. You could break it and then use the nerves to move them any way you want to. And for the existence of revolutionary struggle, people have been trying to confront it with one thing. And the revolutions that have been successful are because they took a multi-pronged attack. So colonialism destroyed the relationship that people have with their women, the relationship that they have economically, their politically organized factions, the division of natural resources, all of these things. So if you can't address these things at the same time,
Economically, politically, morally, spiritually.
which is what Russia allowed, or not allowed, but enabled Niger and Burkina Faso to do, to say, hey, France is buying uranium from you for 25 cents an ounce. That's criminal. On the open market, it's 200, right? So we're gonna help you get these people out of here. You'll get your uranium to the open market, but you'll sell it to us for 75, and you'll sell it to everybody else for 175. And at the end of the day, you'll still be sitting on $1 trillion. These people will be sitting in France, and you'll be way more better off with us, because we may come in and look like colonizers too, sure. But here's the difference. We don't have a history of colonization with you at all. Yeah. We have a history of supporting your movements for freedom. And unfortunately, now whether you like Russia or not, that's undeniable. Anytime that apartheid or a Leopold-like person has taken control of a subsection of Africa, maybe it was just because they were diametrically opposed to Britain and the United States.
That was a
but
while
the
ago,
Russians
wasn't it?
have continuously supported them.
Maybe a while ago.
Take
And
Nelson
and
Mandela.
supported
Take
Israel's
Nelson
right
Mandela.
to exist too.
Take Nelson.
They were the first one.
Take Nelson
In the
Mandela.
minute we have, yeah.
Take Nelson Mandela.
All right, take him. Yes.
He was considered a terrorist by the United States up
Right.
until like 10 years ago.
Right.
And who was backing him? The Russians. They've built this idea in the rest of the world that they support struggles for freedom. Now, if people who are scholars and historians of the Russian Empire look at it, they'll tell you, oh no, I'm sorry. This is a new thing, because in the past, they weren't supporting any struggles for freedom. They were supporting areas they wanted to take over, right?
Listen, what I was, I think what I want to leave this show with, it's been so great to have you.
Thank you.
Was that beautiful passage that you were describing about the music and creating this sense of beauty. And I think that's, my grandfather was an artist. You've been to the apartment. He studied at the Royal Academy in Dresden. And when I asked him, what was his art about? It was about beauty. And he described it the same way you are. Thank you so very, very much. Thank you so very, very much for watching us today on The Radical Imagination.
And this final piece is very personal to me, because I lost so many people in my life in these past few years. It's like a long winter where you watch everything die. Colder than the farthest that the sun has been in the sky. You freeze to death and you stop and take a moment to cry. The teardrops turn into icicles in your eye. So many funerals, you start to feel empty inside. You have to cut away pieces of yourself to survive. It's like the good earth is running out of things to provide. You see the truth when you let go of your pride. I used to be angry at my dead friends, like, what? You left me behind. And now I'm happy that they moved on with their spiritual lives. They don't have to live with the pain or deception and lies. And I know that I'll see them again, right before it's my time. Look, I don't pretend to know what happens after we die, but I promise you'll all get to find out at the end of the ride. I can't change the world, but I can take care of my tribe. And through the longest winter, we will survive. It's like a long winter where you watch suffering grow, trying to wake up all the people that fell asleep in the snow, but they're all gone like the world that I used to know. They call it drug addiction, but it's suicide on the low. I dedicate this to the people that will never be old. Your spirit will survive inside the music that I compose. Even the sun dies and one day it'll explode like the shattered dreams of people trying to conquer the globe, leaving a passport and little pieces left to decode, floating to the center of the universe to the cold. All you have left is audacity when you're exposed. That's why a lot of people pretend to see the emperor's clothes instead of the naked corruption that's corrupting your flesh. They designed a way to make a profit off of your death. I held a breath and tumbled out the shallow grave in disguise. And through the longest winter in my life, I did survive. Peace. Thank you.